this video is going to be dedicated to what I believe is an erotic masterpiece and one of the most underrated films from the 1970s, and that is Lau Xing-han's sexy little gem, House of the Lute. When it comes to this one, it tends to be reduced to an erotic film with cheeky satirical undertones, which surprises me because it's blatantly the other way around. In fact, I'd argue that it's one of Hong Kong cinema's best attempts at satire. I know that's a huge statement, but it's true, and quite obvious, which surprises me further that it gets so overlooked, especially considering that it was released during the early period of what's known as the Hong Kong New Wave. The story is deceptively simple, concerning itself with an old and rich musician who specialises in the pipa, commonly referred to in the West as the Chinese lute. The elderly man hires a young and strapping working class man to be the gardener for his mansion, but in true pornographic fashion, the old man is also married to an incredibly attractive and much younger woman who takes a liking to this new gardener. The situation isn't helped by the fact the old man is bound to a wheelchair and clearly suffers from impotence, leaving his wife, who is still very much in her sexual awakening, to endure relentless sexual frustration. Okay, judging by the plot alone, the film is, at best, a third-rate lonely housewife erotica, and at worst, hot wife porn. But there's way more going on here, and the characters are not actually as superficial as their actions might suggest. The gardener is a relatively good person, or maybe innocent is the right word, and the wife isn't really a gold digger. In fact, her husband's music is really what attracted her to him more than his money. The deterioration of the character's moral stability is more to do with how the film functions as a fable about the dangers of materialism, and at the same time, a type of metaphor for Hong Kong's problematic, though incredibly unique, class system. Given Hong Kong's long and frankly inconsistent history of censorship, partly resulting in its cinema developing a reputation for being apolitical, or what Tom Cunliffe phrased, politically neutered, which I think is more accurate, I believe House of the Lute addresses these issues in ways earlier Hong Kong films couldn't, and if I'm honest, I think very few films have addressed them as effectively since. Regarding the materialism and consumerism commentary, you need to consider a bit of history to fully appreciate it, and as this is a history-based channel, I'm about to indulge in that right now. Although Hong Kong's industrialisation properly began in the 1950s, it would be the 1960s and 70s that saw a major era of transition regarding its society and culture. A guy called Matthew Turner argued that in the 1960s specifically, marked an era where consumer culture began to play a major part in defining the development of Hong Kong's identity, and was a type of coming of age for the people where they became a culture of lifestyle. Hong Kong's post-World War II economic boom was heavily romanticised and mythologised by the local media and popular collective imagination, and according to Fung-Yip, triggered and interacted with an array of paralleling social phenomena, urbanisation being a significant example, as it was closely linked with Hong Kong's industrialisation and growing population, both being catalysts for a flourishing mass culture of consumers who were immersed within new architecture, entertainment and leisure options, consisting of things like pulp fiction, radio, dance halls, shopping centres, department stores, and by 1967, free-to-air commercial television. This all led to Hong Kong being seen as a materialist-driven society, and for a lot of Hong Kongers, this materialism was interpreted as corrupting family and moral values, a concern that I believe the film channels beautifully within its parable-like format. And before anyone accuses me of being overly speculative or interpreting the film from some kind of woke left-wing bias, the director, Lau Xing-han, has actually written about this in his own critical works, especially his interpretations of Cantonese cinema from the 50s and 60s, so take it up with him. A specific example of this is when the director compares how the family is represented in two films, the first being Parents' Heart and the second A Mad Woman. In the former, the poorer family is depicted as the centre of warmth and affection, but in the latter, the family, who are a large and materialistically wealthy one, are shown to be oppressive and spiteful. For Lau, Cantonese cinema subtly expressed concerns for the health of the family in the face of a more materialist-driven society. These anxieties are present in Lau's own film, however, the difference is House of the Lute expresses criticism and subtle protest, whilst the older Cantonese films went more in the direction of stories that related to the struggle of the Hong Kong people, but ultimately the final message was to just learn to deal with it. Despite there being an anti-materialist attitude to this, they ultimately left a submissive aftertaste. An example of this that's been studied quite often is Kind Mother, Naughty Son, where a son who's been a very naughty boy leaves his mother and humble birthplace to become corrupted by the big city, inevitably resulting in a moral confusion and conflict with his mother. But eventually the naughty son stops being naughty and returns to his mom and their poor lifestyle. Lee Chuk-to frames the sentiments behind the film's conclusion as the son learning to live with poverty and his mother and find comfort in his social origin. This seems to be the consensus amongst Cantonese filmmakers of the 1950s, which was particularly problematic considering that most of the film's audience, at least locally anyway, were becoming more preoccupied with oppressive working conditions and a severe lack of social welfare support. So, the British colonial government would have benefited from people learning to live with and accept their poor situation, rather than actively trying to change it. House of the Lute, on the other hand, doesn't offer this submissive resolution, but expresses the idea that Hong Kong's materialist-obsessed culture can't just be accepted, as it eventually rots away at everything it touches. After the gardener begins his affair with the wife, he's introduced into her leisurely upper-class world and begins to enjoy the lifestyle and status. However, the longer he indulges in such privileges, the more obsessed he becomes with consumption and seeing everything around him as something to be materialistically owned. Even seeing the wife as a possession, at one point even trying to tattoo his name onto her as if she's now his property. The film is a parable, warning its viewers of the dangers of materialism that was changing Hong Kong society at the hand of rapid industrialisation and modernity. And unlike most of the Cantonese films from the 50s, acceptance and a stoic disposition is just not the answer, as it will eventually destroy all that is still meaningful. Another part of the film that's brilliantly executed, especially considering my affinity with history, is how it hints at the collaborative colonial concept. I've briefly mentioned this before in my other videos, but it refers to how we often view colonial Hong Kong as this binary existence between the powerful British and grassroots Chinese, but there was actually a third tier that existed in between. This was a small group of Chinese elites who were educated and encouraged by the British colonisers to act as mediators and help run the territory. Law Wing-Sang coined this as collaborative colonialism. Collaborative obviously refers to how important this collaboration between the Europeans and Chinese elites were to facilitate the colonial power channels, which often resulted in these elites being seen as traitors and oppressive agents. Despite being ethnically Chinese and in a relative position of power, they were futile in helping the average grassroots Hong Konger who was struggling within the system these elites benefited from. The old man echoes the impotency of the Chinese elites and how they were powerless to serve the needs of the Hong Kong people, simply being conduits for the colonial powers. Despite being somewhat an anchor to traditionalism with his mastery of the pipa, for the wife, like the Hong Kong people in general, this visceral affinity with old China was no longer enough. For me, the film's parable-like approach captures these sentiments brilliantly. It actually works as pretty good erotica too, but unfortunately I can't show you much as YouTube has subtly accused me of being a pervert and gave me this warning. My Pink Film series years back got me this reputation, so I have to be careful with sex-related content, as the YouTube censorship team will punish me, and I've developed a bit of a taste for it.